So for everyone watching this video, we welcome you to what is basically the launch of what we're going to call the Red Horse Chronicles. So thanks for watching, and we're here today to kind of, from the inside, from the bowels, if you will, of the technology industry, really reveal the truth about artificial intelligence, what's real, what's not real. And in 2024, look for our experts to be coming out with more pamphlets about how artificial intelligence um, impacts all of our lives. It impacts the economy, your jobs, your parenting. You all know what's happening from what you see already with face recognition and what your children are watching and so forth and so on. We're going to delve into a little bit of that today and have our audience here and our experts get into some of these issues and take it wherever it leads us. So on my right is Mike Tabalovich. He's from Chicago. He flew from Chicago to talk about the corporate aspects and what happens with artificial intelligence and how the corporations are pushing it and what impact that's going to have on the rest of us. And we got Adrian Bowles, formerly, I would call him, he's going to object, but he was very close to the IBM's Watson project and knows a lot about that and has really tracked the industry from way back until now. So he has many years of experience of really understanding what's really going on in the background and where it's going in the future. And we have our guest here. John, you want to introduce yourself and why you're here?
Hi everyone, I am John, and I am interested in AI and how it affects daily life.
Okay. And we invited a lot of lawyers today because John and I are on the board of the Connecticut Mediation Association, so we work with a lot of lawyers. Not to offend anybody, but none of them came today. And maybe we'll talk about how if we automated LexisNexis and Westlaw, we probably wouldn't need any lawyers, right? Mike, you're going to talk to that, right? In fact,
you a lot of money.
save you a lot of money. So we don't want to offend anybody today, but we're going to have fun with the topic. So thank you for coming in. And the first thing I want to start out, I'm going to frame it a little bit and then turn it over to Adrian and Mike and have John ask a lot of questions. Here, oh, turn it. Yes, of course, in order. Of course. Okay. So I'm going to kick this off by saying I'm going to actually frame this issue to really get to the root of where the misinformation is coming from in the industry and what you're reading in the hype. And I will say that as a starting point, one of the first things that is being conflated by everybody, including Elon Musk, and we're going to correct him today. So Elon, if you're watching, good luck. We're going to show you what you need to know also, and the rest of you. So artificial intelligence is really a misnomer because what it's doing is basically repurposing and reconstructing information that has already been produced by human beings. And we have a set of algorithms that are being written. And these reconstructions are being repurposed and re-output so that you can, get GPT-4 or whatever is out there, or Bard if you happen to be, using Bard or whatever. And it's more reasonably, more accurately should be called, not artificial intelligence, but imitation intelligence. It's really imitating what we are doing. So let's be clear. Now, when you look at the movies iRobot or Blade Runner or Terminator or any of those, which I think a lot of us have seen, I'm going to start out by saying that the media and even technology experts, quote unquote, conflate those two. And what we're going to start out with here today is the fact is what you're being really shown in reality is what we call weak AI. And weak AI is that stuff which is going to, be things like generative AI, things like the robots that we're all using that are on the assembly lines and face recognition. Mike is going to really talk a lot about that and how that is going to impact everything else. And Adrian's going to follow on. I'm going to basically set the stage by saying that the way that people picture this today is like there's this evolution between a robot and what I'm going to call a humanoid. So I'm going to use the term humanoid to introduce that here. The iRobot of the Hollywood and science fiction. The humanoids are not an evolution from robots. They have nothing whatsoever to do with each other. We're going to explain that today, and we're actually going to show some, and we're going to put up in the video here when it comes up, we're going to show you some graphics of why the iRobot, sentient robot that has what they call, Albert Bandura calls self-efficacy, which is a really humanistic condition. They can replicate ultimately, but they'll never procreate. and we're going to talk about emergent properties and why the iRobots, the humanoids of the future, cannot be associated with what we're going to talk about, which is the weak AI that we know today. And we're going to start talking about that. So I will just parenthetically put in here that if you want to know the difference, and we're going to go back to weak AI and talk a lot about weak AI because that's what you're going to experience in your normal lives generally. But I want to just put in about the strong AI thing, the idea of trying to recreate how humans think and behave, how we actually think and behave. And I'll just mention a little factoid, which is a single nerve cell. It can only process a single element of an AI process. Working on a computer can process that element that goes in your neuron 100,000 times faster than a neuron. But if you were to scan the room as a human and look around the room and try and process pictures of candles or the wallpaper or whatever, you would be actually working faster, 100,000 times faster than a computer because of the way that we aggregate information in the brain. So the human brain and the AI brains, even though they're using neural mechanisms, we're going to explain the difference between those. And Adrian and Mike are going to speak to that, and we're going to explore those differences. And if you want to know about real strong AI, which is something that's very dear to my heart, you have to read the John Holland, you have to read Douglas Hofstadter, you have to read Daniel Dennett, and understand how humans actually think and work. And then we'll talk about that as an offline. So I'm at this point going to turn it over to first Mike Topolovich, our expert from Chicago. Thanks for coming in from Chicago, Mike. So,
thanks.
And he's our rock star. I'm kind of like the guy who kind of explains the social and political and economic impact of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk a lot to John and John's questions. And we're going to talk about the law. We're going to talk about parenting. Parenting's a big thing to me. We're going to talk about education and so forth. Well, Mike's going to start it out at the corporate level and bring it down to the level of, and he's going to talk about different aspects of generative AI. And later we're going to hear from Adrian, who's going to talk about degenerative AI. And I'm waiting like crazy to hear about degenerative AI. So Mike, kick it off. What do you got?
So first of all, thank you for calling me a rock star, but I made it past the age of 27 without dying, so I don't fit that description.
But actually, Adrian's played with rock bands before, and you're a huge rock band fan yourself. So, yeah. I mean, I'm the odd man out here, but go ahead, sorry.
So to put things into perspective, my view of AI is slightly skewed in that what I'm trying to do is apply the technology as it exists today, as it will probably exist tomorrow, to problems we've been trying to solve in the corporate world for decades. And it's always a new technology cycle that Silicon Valley is thrusting upon us with big hype, big promises, big agendas, but really does it add value? So my perspective in all this is to take the enterprise architecture angle, understand what technologies exist today that could potentially help in the enterprise, versus what is being sold by Silicon Valley plutocrats to try and make billions of dollars off of something that isn't quite mature and ready yet. But how do we do this in a thoughtful manner that actually moves business process design and human-centric interfaces to a point where we are now working together with artificial technology, artificial intelligence, to drive us forward as humans. And again, my view is very narrow in that I focus on making things better in enterprise technology, enterprise organizations, but everything we talk about, as you know, is applicable throughout society and throughout everything we do. So from that perspective, I don't take a skeptical approach to AI. I'm an AI enthusiast and AI optimist. But what I'm seeing now in the world is AI being not necessarily incorrectly applied to things, but just being applied to the same problems we've been trying to solve for decades. Maybe it's something new, it's a shiny new technology, but is it going to be the panacea that we're being sold? Is this going to be truly a game-changing technology, or are we just going to kill it off by greed and just trying to make a buck out of it before it has the chance to mature into something bigger?
So, Mike, I want to kick this off because I want to plunge right in here and ask you, and it's going to be asked by other people. And you're a futurist. You kind of see what's happening in the industry and where it's going in the future. As this person who's very much in small business, small and mid-sized businesses, and you talk about corporate, what's going to happen to small and mid-sized? What will happen to entrepreneurs, for example? People, what's AI going to do to entrepreneurs and small business? What kind of transformation do you see coming that's going to filter down from corporate or filter up to corporate from there?
So from that angle, if you go back and look at the technology cycles we've been through in the last 25 or so years, go back to the beginning of the internet, the mid-90s. Everybody needed a website. And again, you had the Silicon Valley grifters trying to sell websites to everybody in the world.
Did you say Silicon Valley grifters? You said that. Okay. We're going to have fun with
My
this.
career started in Silicon Valley. I feel I've earned the right to call my kind grifters. But everybody had to have a website. And if you didn't have a website, you didn't have a business. And that didn't necessarily turn out to be true, but the entrepreneurs, the small businesses who learned how to use the web for commercial means did very well. And then we had mobile computing, we had cloud computing, Web3, I don't even know what that was, if it's even still a thing, and now AI. And it's not necessarily the technology itself, it's always about how we apply the technology. So entrepreneurs, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, if they find a way to make this technology useful to where it makes their lives and their businesses better, great. That it's how you apply it that matters, not the technology itself. From an enterprise perspective, enterprise is lost at this point. Enterprise is being run by a bunch of middle managers who want things done in. They talk about things being post-industrial era, but we still manage things as if we're manufacturing widgets. Everything is very productivity based. Like the McKinsey article on developer productivity that caused the whole kerfuffle in the development community. We're still seeing that mindset in the enterprise. It's just very narrow thinking about how to apply technology to something that could be measured in very precise terms. We don't live in a precise world anymore. We live in a world that is imprecise, there's always behaviors and something new emerging every day. And I think we have to kind of retrench as humans and say, do we need all this technology? And if so, what are we going to use it for to better society at this point? I think the technology allows us to think bigger than just how we squeeze a penny out of everything we produce, how to make more with less. The traditional efficiency versus effectiveness argument, I don't think really, it's not the right argument to be having right now. I don't know what the exact right argument is, but we need to start thinking bigger than the way we've been thinking. That big thinking, I think, is going to be misapplied in the enterprise because we're going to try and apply technology the way we always have. So that's what I'm trying to work through right now is how do we avoid the same mistakes of the previous cycles, look at this technology for what it is, which is completely game-changing for us as a species, and stop making the same tactical, myopic mistakes that we've been making for decades, and really start to see the way forward. And I'm not here with answers. I'm here to probably ask more questions than I have answers, but that's why we're here as a group, is to kind of understand what is real, right? I do love the term degenerative AI because generative AI has been with us for a little less than a year, and I'm already sick of it. So where do we go from here? How do we apply this to ourselves as individuals, to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, up to the enterprise level? And then eventually, how do we think beyond that to beyond corporate structures and just looking at systemic issues, societal issues, political issues, curing disease? Like, how do we move beyond? How do we get out of our own way to get to that point? That's my whole thing.
So that sounds like a segue to you, Adrian. Maybe you have some responses there, some thoughts.
Well, something you said just sort of triggered a gut reaction about the earlier waves of things like e-commerce and cloud. Back in about 99 to 2003, I was actually teaching a course on e-commerce in the MBA program at NYU. And I remember at one point saying, 10 years from now, you shouldn't have a course on e-commerce, it should just be commerce.
Right.
Well, in 2010, I was teaching a course in e-commerce in the business school at Boston College.
Yes.
Some of these things, it takes a while for it to really become ingrained in the fabric. And I think that we see the same thing. When we look at AI, what most people think of as AI today, Brock has articulated it as weak versus strong, which is two ends of the spectrum. But now I see so many people thinking that AI is simply deep learning, deep machine learning. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And we can mention names. My litmus test for reading somebody's pontification about AI is if they think that anyone associated with deep learning is a godfather of AI, they're off by a few decades. Yeah.
Sure.
There was enough going on in AI, the foundational stuff in the 50s and 60s before my time, but in 70s, 60s and 70s, we were writing conversational systems, adaptive systems,
Yes.
and early systems that we now think of as chatbots. The difference is we've got systems generating their own stuff. And that's where, when I started talking about degenerative AI, my gut was, I started looking at, I go back a long way with interactive systems, conversational systems, natural language, computational linguistics, and now it seems like we've gotten to the point where we've thrown out the rules, and I don't mean that casually, like, there are no rules to what we're doing, but rules as knowledge representation and the way we understand them. That's all sound, and it's a bunch of wildly firing neurons that are let loose, if you will.
Right.
And my problem was I've done some experiments on ChatGPT in particular. The more you know about a topic, the less you trust ChatGPT when you ask it to write about that topic.
Right.
It's true.
Right.
It's true.
And for fun as an analyst, I had it write my bio. And it was fascinating because 80% of it was regurgitation of things that you could find online if you
Right.
But then it started making stuff up. So, yeah, I taught at a few universities. Berkeley wasn't one of them. Stanford wasn't one of them. But according to ChatGPT, if I kept asking it, it had me doing all kinds of things. So then for fun, I had it write this is the topic one. I had it write bios of George Santos. Because this week announced that he was not going to run for re-election.
Right.
But ChatGPT made up stuff about him that even Santos hasn't made up about. His military career.
Well, they captured the real essence of it now,
Well,
right?
that's it. But that's when you get into my feeling of degenerative. If the information going into the large language model is being used to generate stuff, if the quality of that information is declining because you're taking something that you've produced and it's going back in, it's like having a family where, you've got parents, you've got the first child, who at that point is an only child, and the parents are dedicating time. When you get more and more kids, by the time you get down to the nth kid, they're learning from the kids that haven't had the benefit of it.
Right.
And ChatGPT and large language models, that part of this garbage out becomes garbage back in.
Right.
And so we need to deal with that. And just this morning I was thinking about the whole thing with hallucinations. And the way I would sum it up, when we have this issue of degenerative, is if you're building systems, let's say you're doing a customer service system, if you had a human customer service rep and they were having hallucination, you would fire them.
Yes.
And I think that we need to demand that same level of rigor for our digital labor.
Right.
Yeah. I remember asking ChatGPT recently can you give me a quote about some subject from a famous person? And they came back with this beautiful quote, one from George Orwell, one from Einstein. So I said, great. I said, that's cool. Use that. Then I started looking up and no such quote existed.
Right.
They made it up, and I asked them, I said, did you lie to me? And then they wanted this big, like, it sounded just like, ChatGPT sounded just like Santos. So maybe ChatGPT could put politicians out of work. Maybe that's their first target audience.
So two things stand out based on what you said, and when I talk about things in the enterprise being cyclical, so if we're feeding garbage data back into the system, that's the fundamental problem that these corporate or enterprise applications of GPT or any of these chatbots will have is it's the quality of data.
Right.
And there's this illusion being sold, this myth being sold that AI will fix all these core problems. But if the data's not good, the data hasn't been good for any technology, and nobody wants to address their data concerns. So if we're not going to address the data concerns for cloud computing, if we're not going to address them for analytics, if we're not going to address them for all the other technology trends, what makes anybody think that corporations are just going to stop now and say, wow, we need to get our data in order so that we can feed our own LLMs?
Right.
Everybody thinks the LLMs are just going to feed themselves, and it is a limitation of human knowledge. So it's fantastic to think, okay, well, we could elevate employees who don't know this, we can elevate them to a higher level by accumulating knowledge at that level. But the problem is, we as humans have not been accumulating that knowledge. Corporate knowledge management is a dumpster fire. Data in most organizations is a dumpster fire. This is what we're going to be feeding into the large language models. We're just going to be we're going to be throwing good data after bad.
Right.
So at some point we will experience model collapse. And then at that point, once we start to experience model collapse at this local level, do we sour on AI? Do we just throw the baby out with the bathwater? Thank you. We throw the baby out with the bathwater because generative AI failed because our data was bad?
So I'm going to throw out some ideas here. All right, so we're on the subject of generative AI, and I'm going to bring up the name of Philip Parker, who was famous a few years ago. He created 200,000 books, and he was targeting an audience of one for each book, and he made quite a fortune, I guess. He did it with 6 programmers and about 60 computers, and 200,000 books he's able to quote unquote write. And it's like Adrian said, it's like 80 to 90% of it was information you could have compiled yourself if you've been doing the work. Garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. And 10 to 15% is stuff that made up. And but these books got certain kinds of audiences. Because you read the title and it's like, one title here I got is the 2007 to 2012 Outlook for Tufted Washable Scatter Rugs, Bath Mats, and Sets that measure 6 feet by 9 feet or smaller in India. He sold 2 copies of that. And they sold for $495 each for 144 pages. All right, so that might be a career. But what does that imply for the wider society? It is what he's doing different than, I don't know, I look back, okay, the Sumerians and the Babylonians were using abacuses at 2500 Common Era, BCE, okay? Is what we're doing now just a more automated, higher powered computer of what the abacus was doing, 2,500 years ago? Is that really what it is? Because it's more than that.
Well, I mean, generative AI is not computation, right? So it's not going to do math unless somebody else has written the math problem out and has published that online, and it was ingested as part of the training of the LLM. Mm-hmm. It's not going to do computation unless you use a plugin like Wolfram Alpha or something to that effect. So it's not going to replace that per se. What it's doing is it's saying, okay, I'm going to take the collected human knowledge, I'm going to make it easier to interface with it. It's going to do what Google promised to do, which was give us a window into all human information, all human knowledge. But the problem with Google initially was you'd be really good at writing Google prompts to get that information out. You had to know exactly what to ask to get that data. Now the new problem with Google is Google's become so powerful that it doesn't even pass along your search requests anymore. it kind of creates a walled garden of search results that it interprets and adds its own meta layer to. That's a different story. So in terms of, replacing other technologies or, being at the forefront of some new way of thinking, no, it's just a regurgitation of our stuff. That's my initial reaction.
So, Mike, you brought up an interesting point about Google. And the fact is, it's interesting to note that it would cost Google $100 billion in server costs alone in 1 year if it were to incorporate AI inference into every one of its web searches. Isn't there a practical limit to what we can expect in the future? I mean, they're not going to lay out $100 billion to incorporate AI into every one of its web searches.
Well, the price of the technology is very high right now. There is global demand for NVIDIA chips that is not being met by supply. So there's the cost of the chips, there's the cost of the infrastructure. Just the raw compute costs, there's the electricity costs of managing these data centers, there's the cooling costs, right? There's all these costs associated with it. And what's happening now with the cost of AI, it's prohibitive for startups. The companies that are well funded, that can throw billions of dollars at the problem, are following the same Silicon Valley playbook of finding a market, throwing a lot of money at a problem, basically in a predatory fashion to force competition out, and then when that competition is gone, and then hopefully at the same time the cost of the technology itself is going down, that's where they're going to find a way to monetize. The monetization of AI is not going to happen anytime soon because it's just so expensive to run. That's why OpenAI had to take billions from Microsoft just to stay alive. I mean,
So you're telling people don't invest in AI companies is what you're saying. Not a good investment at this point.
What I'm saying is the investment that it would take to reach the level of scale necessary to even put out a product right now is beyond anything that a small startup could hope to attain. This is going to take billions and billions and billions of dollars. These big companies are going to burn through that cash over a period of years until they find a way to make it profit. And they can afford to do that. I mean, probably less so now with interest rates being what they are, but they can afford to do that. They have the cash to do it. And that gives them the competitive advantage in the marketplace because, the big tech companies are always going to be able to outcompete on capital. Mm-hmm. And so by throwing money at the problem and then watching how people adopt this technology, they can shape it as it goes, find the most profitable way to provide the service. And then at that point, that's where enshittification sets in. And now we have the service that's been formulated by what's profitable, not necessarily what's the best application of it. And years from now, we will have kind of what we have with Google now, where it's like, okay, the search results are okay, but they're obviously influenced by advertising. They're obviously the best results for Google and not for you. And that's, if we don't check what's happening with AI, that's what's going to happen with AI. It's going to become a problem.
I would just like to point out very clearly that nothing I say today should be taken as investment advice.
However, that sounds like a disclaimer.
It's absolutely a disclaimer.
However,
I'm careful because, well, I'll give you one example. Back in '99, when I first started teaching in business school, they had a case study out of Red Hat. Red Hat had its IPO in that.
I remember.
And at the end of the semester, when my students came up to me and thanked me for the tip on Red Hat, he said it would pay for his tuition. I hadn't bought Red Hat. I hadn't talked about it as something that we should invest in.
Right.
I was talking about this change in the business model. I'm sure I would have heard from him if it had gone down at that point. So when we talk about products or projects or services not being
productivity. So from that perspective, I can almost guarantee that any company that is getting value from AI has been working in AI for probably a decade, at least, experimenting with how they could apply it, but then finding a way to dovetail the technology with improvements in the system and the process. One is not going to happen without the other. So what we're seeing in the corporate world now, where companies are producing more knowledge-based work, more knowledge-based output as opposed to widgets, that they're swinging for the fences. They're looking for the multiple X gains from this technology, and it's not there yet. Manufacturing, again, I don't care what the
Will
technology
they ever be there, Mike? Where is large deep learning models? What's the payoff? Where's the return on investment?
This gets into a whole discussion on just the concept of value versus wealth or value versus currency, right? What's happening right now is people are trying to make money from AI.
Right.
And what AI will do over time is add value to society that is so far beyond what we could possibly imagine right now. And a real simple way of thinking about this is go and look at the stock market. Go and look at a chart of the stock market over the last 100 years. And it's going to look like this. It's going to go up. It's going to have its little, dips here and there, but it's going to look like a trend line that goes straight up. But if you isolate that and look at 2008, or you look at, any crashes, and you're going to have the big dip, and then you're going to have the recovery from the dip. But over time, everything kind of stratifies. We're going to see that type of gain in AI, but I think it's going to be more of that hockey stick curve at some point when we detach it from, oh, okay, well, I make $1 per widget now, I can make $1.50 per widget, to let's just radically rethink everything now that we have the technology that can aid us as humans in our thinking. And let's start thinking beyond what's right in front of us, which is wealth and dollars. Let's think of wealth in a new way. Let's think of it in terms of quality of life. Let's think of it in terms of the human experience, and that detachment from just looking at the next dollar to looking at how we can improve life for everybody over time. I think that's the key to it. That's my biggest concern with AI, is that, again, we're just going to, the enshittification of the technology could potentially prevent the future value from actually emerging. And so it's that emergence that will occur that we can't predict. So I can't predict the future. We have this huge complex system called society that will, we're going to make these changes now, and through chaos, through the butterfly effect, things will emerge over time that we couldn't possibly predict today.
My concern, though, Mike, I'm going to throw this out, play devil's advocate here. I give you enough examples. We talked to a police officer today at the lobby where we were. Yeah. And he was talking about technology that affects policemen, and he was talking about how he lectures young police officers about the experience he had about body language, and how the reading of body language is a human thing, and that, and we're saying, yes, AI can't do that. We can't read body language like he. And the young guys were so dependent on technology that they often miss the real purpose. They miss the real scene of what's taking place. And I brought up two issues. My concern, I'm going to throw it right on the table. My suspicion is that the hype of technology is what's selling, and that the real technology that's going to help us or serve social purposes is not what's selling.
Right.
I'll give you two examples for the police. I will tell you how many times I've seen the police department completely get conned, and I'm going to name names. ShotSpotter doesn't work. It doesn't help. They've way oversold ShotSpotter, and I can't tell you how many millions and millions of dollars police departments have spent on ShotSpotter. And John, you're a minority. I know face recognition, completely biased. The face recognition, when it comes to minorities, is horrible, because it gets that dirty data that comes in, the input of data, right? So they're selling technologies that really, in a social perspective, are not up to the hype whatsoever. There's a way over hype with certain technologies that people are falling for, instead of using the really usable stuff. Yeah, John, you have a question.
Concerning that, and I'd like to ask you guys privately. I don't know if you guys know, Connecticut is planning, actually they're already experimenting with reading license plates using police tools in order to find out the information of the owner of the car, whether they have warrants or any open tickets that they need to pull this person over. Obviously, a lot of people don't like that.
What about you? Does that concern you? Do you hear that?
I hear that myself. I have nothing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But why would I want a police cruiser coming up behind me just to use an AI to read my license plate to see if there's anything open about this field? If they have no reason to pull me over, what's the point of finding me?
That is a good question.
Adrian, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
So move from racial profiling to just hiding behind AI, saying, "Hey,
Yeah. It's the technology. It's not me. It's the
Right.
technology, right?
The whole other world that opens up some more issues.
But actually, Mike and Adrian, we're three high-tech white guys. And in fact, the data sets that are out there are pretty much what the software is produced by AI is 80% produced by high-tech white guys.
yeah."
There's bias built into the system.
And that is an interesting distinction because now the attacks are on the technology itself. When
Right.
ChatGPT hallucinates, oh, the technology sucks. Well,
Yeah, right.
no, the underlying data sucks. And so the fact that there's bias in the data does not surprise me because it's data that has been input over time by a society that has been in control of society for how many decades, if not centuries. So that bias will ring true, and we just get back to the garbage in, garbage out situation.
Well, I will just say that it goes beyond that. In terms of the hallucinations, it's not just that the data is bad. It's the way today's deep learning algorithms use that data. And, basically it's all about prediction. I mean, we do that. You're having a conversation with someone. My wife is sitting next to me. Say, I love my you fill in wife before I get to it. And I might have been talking about when I was
Yeah.
And if that data isn't in, then today's chatbots are going to fill it in with something.
Right.
And it's not that it's necessarily reflecting bias, but it is bias in terms of what it's seen that leads it to make that particular
Right.
prediction.
Why can't it just say, I don't know?
It could,
But it doesn't.
but it doesn't.
Why?
And Brock, when you did the introductions, you mentioned that I had some experience with Watson.
Right.
If you go back to the version of Watson that played Jeopardy, one of the things about that I really like, dig into the architecture, is they spent time, they analyzed every previous episode of Jeopardy to come up with, I believe it was 2,500 frameworks or archetypes for a question. And the data itself, before a answer was produced, or a question was produced in the case of Jeopardy, was analyzed and evaluated and ranked based on some interpretation of trustworthiness, right? Looking at the evidence. And today, none of that exists in the large language model.
Right.
We've gone from a situation where I started out, most of what you had in your system was rules that were painstakingly crafted by people who were domain experts, and you didn't have a lot of data. The first natural language app that I wrote ran in 64K.
Yeah.
Right?
Remember those days? Yeah.
So you have to be thinking about that. Today, it's let's just keep running it, letting it until something comes out that looks good.
Right.
And that's
Right.
scary.
It is interesting that AI won't say I don't know because it's kind of dovetails into when we as humans create technology, especially AI, we're doing it almost based on ourselves, right? We designed neural networks based on how the human brain works, and one of the most fascinating things that came out of reading Daniel Kahneman was just this concept where if the human brain does not have an answer at the ready, it'll substitute a different answer from a different question. And I kind of feel like we're designing generative AI to do something similar.
But that's
Just
how
bullshit your
politicians
way
are trained, right?
Yeah, that's how politicians are trained.
One more reference to watching for Jeopardy. Every time it gave an answer, you didn't see this on the screen, but it had a list of answers, and for each of those, it had a probability or confidence. in it.
Yeah. Obviously, right.
And now we have confidence without confidence at lightning speed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that is.
Well, that was a good segue because, well, I don't know, John, you had another. I thought you were thinking about another question. You had another question.
I'm writing down confidence without confidence. 'Cause
Confidence, no confidence, right.
I'll think.
Okay, so Adrian, you brought up a good point about I'm thinking about the food. Very nice.
Well, let's get in. So I'd written down two things based on what Adrian said previously. Obviously, we already talked about garbage in, garbage out, but the other part was labor, right? There's already a palpable disdain towards labor at the executive level, in enterprises. That's been there for quite a while. We're starting to see an attack on smart people, developers. There's just this strange kind of these different fiefdoms that are showing up in the corporate world, but there's an obvious disdain towards labor. And there's this inverse correlation between who reaps the rewards when a company is successful and who takes the blame when companies aren't successful. And I'll give you a hint. Workers don't get the rewards. Workers get all the blame. How does AI accelerate this, right? This is always the question. This is, getting to the heart of the fear, uncertainty, doubt in everybody's minds. Is AI going to take our jobs? And there's the knee-jerk reaction to that, and then there's the kind of more thoughtful response to it. And I've seen a lot of thinking on this, but where do you see that going in terms of what is AI? And if we want to focus on generative, what does this do to the average worker? Does this raise the bar for workers reaching a level of value to the company to where they are still employable? And then who's at risk here in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I have a good example of that, actually. That's something interesting brought up, Mike, because, and we can find dozens of examples, but I subscribe to a Canadian authors magazine by the name of The Walrus. Very good articles. And The Walrus recently published excerpts from a bunch of authors. And apparently there's generative AI out there that is using a data set that comes from something called Books 3. And Books 3 is basically swallowed, I think it's like upwards of 3,000 authors and all their work, sucked them up. And I think it's, the Books 3, I think it's both the Canadian American authors. And these authors basically stolen their work. And the authors are outraged because not only about, I think some comments were about not only that they stolen their work, but they didn't give any credit. But on top of that, they really brought a point that's really big to me about there's a larger thing, which I'm going to get into a little bit later on that, if I can preach about a little bit. There is overall a kind of devolution of authenticity in our culture. I mean, as a parent, I've seen it in my kids. They spend all this time, but there's no thought process going. It's like almost there's conversion of the machines are getting more and more quote unquote intelligence, if you believe that processing data sets is intelligence, that format. And meanwhile, the humans that we're bringing up are getting less and less able to actually think. And John, we've had this discussion. John, you go like this, and I'll go, I'll 7 times 9, and you can go, 63, dude, what are you doing? And 10 minutes later, they come out 7 times 9. Yeah.
I can't do any computation like that anymore. No, I'm dead serious. I'm a big believer in the second brain concept, so I have outsourced a significant part of my thinking to technology, but those neurons just aren't connected anymore. Like, I can't do basic math. And then compound that with the change to Common Core, which is a completely new way of teaching mathematics. I just remember my 7th, 8th grade kids, I couldn't help them with their math because not only are my maths bad, but I couldn't understand the directions. So to your point, what we're seeing is an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction of underlying principles.
But you're still a great extractor of the information, even though your math wasn't good.
I know how to get to a system, a technology that will provide the answer for me that I can trust.
Exactly.
And
but the thinking, the process behind it is you, not a machine, right?
the thinking behind it is, yes, I need to go here, here, here to store my data, to retrieve my data, to compute data. But that thinking, it's almost like the human brain has adapted to, a point where we can have these externalities. We become transcendent of our own thinking, and that's fascinating to me. That's also what frightens me, because I'm not frightened by the fact that you can't do math anymore. I think if we can teach kids how to do math and the fundamentals of math and why math is important, we don't need everybody to be a math major.
I use a bad example. I'm thinking more about the critical thinking skills. Do you think those are developing? I don't know. I see it.
They're
But maybe not-
changing. They're
They're
changing.
changing or developing. I don't know. What do you think, Adrian?
I think it's just becoming more apparent that we have not trained a generation in time. But I want to come back to the one word that you said that's missing from the rest of the discussion. You don't worry about losing those skills because you know where to get it from sources that you trust.
Yeah.
Trust is the word.
Trust
Trust
is the
is
word.
key.
Yeah, trust is the
Because
key word. Yeah.
if you're going out to those systems, I mean, when Wikipedia first came out, and I was teaching, so
And if you saw a Wikipedia quote,
you're right.
it was discounted, and now everybody uses Wikipedia.
So it's still discounted. My universities, we can't use any Wikipedia sources. What
Yeah.
the way to get around is to go to Wikipedia and get the quote, and you go straight down to the source.
Right.
And that's what I use Gen AI for. I ask it questions. I don't believe any of the answers I get, but if there's something intriguing and plausible, I'll follow that rabbit hole to find the information. But again, it's the information that I'm getting through Google or
Right.
through my search. Is that plausible?
Oh, one second. The problem is, a lot of people will take it to that step, but they won't take it a step further. So they get these references from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
There was a case, where are we now? November, earlier this year, where the Avianca, I don't know if you've seen this one, the airline was being sued by a passenger said they were injured when the food cart hit.
Ah, yes.
And the attorney for the plaintiff cited all these cases, similar law,
They didn't
and
exist.
they did not exist.
Yeah.
But ChatGPT confidently produced
Yeah.
fake cases.
And
So
that confidence begets confidence.
therein,
Feedback loop there.
therein is degenerative
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
Right? Because if those cases go back in and they end up in
This is a great point. Okay, go ahead.
Enjoy, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. That's a great point because I wanted to segue off of what Adrian said and talk about, you're right, it's about trust. But humanity, looking back at humanity and humanity's development, humans have always been gullible. They always fall for the people who are demagogues, who will sell false information. We see that a lot even in the politicization of a lot of issues that shouldn't be politicized because the facts aren't there. And so,
Charisma.
We
goes
don't
a
need-
long-
I know,
Charisma goes a really
but-
long way.
isn't AI now what Adrian's saying, what you're saying, that we're going to need people to actually have a higher degree of skepticism and actually demand them to be less gullible in order to make sure their own interests aren't being damaged by this stuff? Aren't we? Isn't that a necessity now that humans have to be a lot more skeptical?
I think you're falling into a thinking trap, which is that you can change minds at this point. Any minds.
And you think that's not possible? That culturally we can't. People looking at this, and if we can expand this and virally get this information out, people start getting really skeptical and finding trusted sources and being a lot more
I think that
picky about their
genie
sources.
is
for
so
trust.
far out of the bottle that I think we need to take a new approach to.
And what would that be?
It's the smart people have to figure out the safeguards, and this is where, you've got the.
Well, people are some of the biggest crooks. Why would we
I was
trust
going to say
crooked
you've
smart people?
Mark Andreessen, who just came out with this whole manifesto on techno optimism, which is basically, governance rules, get out of our way, right? Just we don't need regulation because the technophiles know what's best for everyone. So I'm just glad he said the quiet part out loud because that's the way these guys think. But on the other hand, if you go to any human being now, and especially the ones who are getting their news from TikTok, and you try and challenge their thinking, there is no thinking happening. It's just a very shallow, I'm processing information, I am being told what to think and feel, and that is how people respond now. So you can go at somebody and say, hey, you need to apply critical thinking skills, but if that was not infused in their thinking during the formative years of schooling, it's never going to happen. You're never going to, number one, convince anybody of your side to any story, any argument just in a one-on-one conversation. But number two, telling people that they have to think more when they're already stressed out and don't have the cognitive capacity to deal with information load today, it's just never going to happen.
Here's my biggest fear, okay? And I got children and grandchildren, okay? What they're learning about technology is the shallow aspect of technology instead. That's what they're learning. They say, oh, I know technology. I know how to do the app. I know how to do this. They can swipe. They can do all. What they're not learning is how to look at that technology and look what's underneath and how it's affecting themselves, their own critical thinking
Because
skills.
they're not taught that.
That's my point. I think education is going to have to transform itself to really start teaching basic critical thinking skills and find the context of technology so know how to deal with it in a healthy manner, not to be sucked in by the goodies, the entertainment aspect of it. It scares me as a parent.
There has to be, and the reason why I don't think that will ever happen in our lifetimes is because if you look at the politicization of school boards, the people running school boards, and the fact that schools are run at a hyper local level. They take guidance from higher levels, from the state level, from the federal level, but unless there's funding tied to something, it's local decision making that is affecting a pool of students that could be completely different than the next district over, and the next district over from that. And so I think at this point it's not necessarily teaching facts anymore, because we really need to be teaching everybody to be skeptical of every fact that they're taught.
That's my
If I
point.
look back at all of the things I've had to unlearn in my life, I could trace it back to these things that teachers taught me in grade school and middle school that were just their opinion. And so if we focus the education on how to think, how to access information, how to evaluate the trustworthiness of information, that's going to go a lot further than the actual facts themselves. Like, did I need to learn the year that the Magna Carta was signed, or was it more important to learn the scope of the Magna Carta and how it applied to the world at that time and the impact it's had on the world since? None of that was taught. It was the Magna Carta was signed in this year by these people. I don't remember any
I
of that.
agree with Mike, but maybe I'll ask Adrian this. How do people know what the trusted source is in this now? How do they find the trusted source with all this stuff? Look at the cons that are out there. I'm getting hit with cons every moment. And from the Democrats, all I get is, we got rid of Trump. Get rid of Trump. And then from the Trump people, we got rid of the Democrats. It's just polarized nonsense. Nobody's talking about issues.
Well,
Nobody's
that's
critical
political
about
science
anything.
101. Find a common enemy and you attack that common
Yeah, but part of what politicians should be doing is it's supposed to be horse trading. That's their job. It's the horse trading. Nobody's horse trading anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, they're horse trading the needs of their constituents for their own personal brain. And
Brand building. It's all brand building.
you know, and you can go on either side of the aisle. On the Republican side, you have the Marjorie Taylor Greens, you have the Matt Gaetzes, you have I don't want to keep naming names, but then on the other side you have the squad, right? You have people who take extreme positions because they know the camera's on them and it boosts their social media presence. There's no thinking happening with these people, and then that would be all right in and of itself. Like, okay, you have your narcissists, you will always have your narcissists, but unfortunately what's happening now is these narcissists are being given a platform for their, not even ideas, but for their messaging. And because their constituents now, or not even their constituents, but their fans are following them on social media, what they're saying is being taken as fact, being taken as gospel, and people are getting riled up over that. Then fundraising happens off of that emotional attachment to the messaging, and it becomes this doom loop of just making people feel shitty about everything, so that you can just continue to feed that, continue to get that negative response to get their dollars. There's no critical thinking happening on any level in society right now, especially government.
And I want to speak to our audience here also that what you're looking at here in the group is the full spectrum of political beliefs, but what we want to do here today is put AI in the context of a larger socioeconomic problem, which is polarization, where the facts are the facts. And the systems work because systems work. If you look at the Gaza situation, look at the Ukraine situation, where it's very hard to tell people it's a systemic situation when you get past the human aspect of the tragedies that are taking place.
Right.
To look behind that and say, well, guess what? It's all a systemic readjustment. Systems know, all systems know internally, they tell themselves the truth. And when you have conflict of whatever sort, that says something's going on wrong behind the scenes in the system, you get feeling plug. And now this week we have Biden talking to Xi Jinping about, oh, please don't bring the fentanyl into our country, where there's tons of fentanyl coming out of China going all over the world. And okay, but is that the root cause? Why are people taking fentanyl? And you even hear the people that are down there dealing with drugs saying, this is not the place to do it. And it isn't about political, it's about systemics. And how can AI help solve some of those systemic problems to actually look at the multivariate cause of these things, and we can put our efforts and money back where they belong without being political, without polarizing. So we're here with different political views and stuff like that, but putting the systemic minds together to say, let's take a look at the root causes and where should we be redirecting our efforts at all, and how can AI help resolve those issues. So you guys might have some thoughts about that.
I would just challenge you, I think, again, one word. You say the systems know. Because to me, if you know something, you can represent it. I believe that real natural systems optimize themselves over time for survival.
Yeah, for survival.
And, you know, as you said, this,
They self-adjust.
they self-adjust based on feedback.
Just like earthquakes or volcanoes, at some point earthquakes readjust and the plates come together, and no more earthquake in 30 years, and another earthquake comes later. And that's how conflicts work too in human beings.
Yeah. And I think that when I started looking recently at generative AI,
Yep.
I went back to the dark ages of my career when I was studying psychology as an undergrad. And basically, there were 3 tracks. I had to know 2 out of 3. It was learning, perception.
Yep.
Think about that. Where that's missing. But the one that you don't see at all in generative AI and much of the work that's being done is the component, which is motivation.
Motivation.
Right? And so now I went back and I looked at the undergraduate courses from the program that I graduated with years ago.
Yeah.
And still had learning, still had perception.
Thank you.
But now it's putting into
Another American.
cognition.
Cognition.
That level.
Yep.
And I think that, we're sort of doing that. I think we lost something by, in the AI world, not looking at motivation. Because if you talk about systems knowing something, I think what they know is based on whatever the motivation. In biology, we always think whatever the system is, if it's human beings, you've got subsystems, you've got your circulatory system, respiratory system, they work together. But overall, but you want to profit.
Adrian, isn't a lot of that motivation traces back to cognitive bias, reinforcement theory, basically, that you're going to be, your motivation to be biased by what you brought, like we mentioned before, what you brought up as a child and so forth. I mean,
You do more of what you're rewarded.
and that's
That's exactly what's happening in machine learning. If you take
okay.
machine learning aside from one thing, if you start to look at it within machine learning, it won't reinforce it. But the question is, what does that mean in machine learning?
Cognitive bias is going to exist in machines because, okay, I'm getting introduced, coming from the physics world, as I guess, that was my major, physics. There's something called scale invariance.
Mm-hmm.
And in physics, scale invariance says that there's, you look throughout the universe and you look at all the patterns of the universe, you see self-similarity. Like people who study chaos theory and complexity theory, you'll see Mandelbrot, models and so forth and so on. The thing is, a lot of economists and even social science are looking at scale invariance and saying, well, scale invariance shows up everywhere because ultimately we're full of quantum particles. We're full
It's a word.
At this point, okay, buddy, this way.
I mean, from a purely self-interest in seeing technology advance,
Right.
I don't know at what cost I would say that it's not worth it.
Right.
But I I have been very negative about some things in generative AI. You know, using the term degenerative was a slight
Yeah, got it.
But the other side of that is I work with a lot of machine tools. Like, you know,
Yes,
my hobby is working with older machines.
you're being humble, putting cars together from scratch.
Yeah. And my father worked in that industry. My brother was a tool diamond. Working with machine tools is the one thing that gives me some confidence about the direction of AI. Because when I'm working on 40 or 50-year-old engines and I'm working with a digital caliper, I know that that digital caliper is created with tools that are less good.
Yeah.
The tools themselves can improve over the previous generation.
Right.
And as I think about that, okay, well, this is possible. I don't think they are the way I would like them to be, because I don't think that a premium is being considered by the people that are designing these systems true. And you know, going back in the early computer days, remember Jerry Weinberg's book, The Psychology of Computer Programming, talking about how people solve problems with computers. And there's one quote that someone who's a professional developer said that if we remove the constraint that the system has to work, you can optimize everything else. And I think that the constraint that's been removed with generative AI today is accuracy, and something that you have reason to believe is true.
Yeah.
That if you're willing to put up with those hallucinations, they can optimize everything else. But I think that that's where really we're going to get that.
And I think that's the trade-off that Silicon Valley is making for us, saying, let's just put it out there and see how people use it, which is the way you find market fit for software.
Yeah.
This is not software. This is important to our future, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren's futures. And if we don't, I love the use of constraints. We have to have some of those constraints in place. We have to have those guardrails in place.
Mhm.
Otherwise, this is going to go in 10,000 different directions, and it's going to become unmanageable. Or worse yet, it's going to become managed by Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and it's going to be dictated upon us in a certain way. So to that point, and the other thing that you said about the caliper is that's iterative and incremental change. Many, 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 many lessons were learned in the development of
Oh yeah.
the upgrade to that system. We're just throwing technology out there right now and hoping for the best. And that scares the hell out of me, because it's not an incremental game. It's just kind of like scattershot. Let's hope that we throw all these seeds out there and something makes us $1 billion.
And in each of the cases with the machinery in particular, you can measure the progress. Are we dealing in inches? Are we dealing in
Right.
10,000s?